Yeah, aloha and welcome to UH Manoa. My name is Jonathan Pettit from the Department of Religions and Ancient Civilizations at UH Manoa. The Center for Chinese Studies at our university includes more than 40 professorial rank faculty specializing in Chinese studies in over 30 disciplines and professional schools. The Center for Chinese Studies aims to foster interdisciplinary understanding of mainland China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and other Chinese-speaking societies worldwide, as well as of Chinese civilization and its long connections to Hawaii. This webinar series is open and free for all and is one of the center's main conduits to engage with scholars in Chinese studies worldwide. We'll have 3 talks a day, each about 20 minutes long, followed by a Q&A session for 20 minutes. So for all of you, there should be a Q&A tool that you can use for questions. So as you have questions throughout any of the talks, feel free to jot down those questions, and we can incorporate those questions at the end of the talks. Also, there's a chat button that you can use for logistical issues. If you're unable to hear something or unable to see any of the presentations, feel free to use that chat feature to do that. Before we begin, I want to take this time to acknowledge the director of the Center for Chinese Studies, Dr. Mingbao Yu, Associate Director Ni Zhang, and Assistant Adriana Choi. It is through their tireless effort that this webinar series is made possible. So today's webinar, Water, Land, and Crops, Agricultures in China's Core and Peripheries, brings together 3 scholars in conversation with UH Manoa's own Frank Zelko. Professor Zelko teaches global environmental history at UH Manoa. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Dr. Zelko.
Thank you, Jonathan. Apologies in advance to everyone. I'm not a scholar of China and don't know the language and not good at the pronunciation, so I beg for your forgiveness in advance. This is promising to be a super interesting panel. I feel I'm kind of primed for it a little bit just because of a graduate seminar I'm teaching in global environmental history this semester. A couple of weeks ago, we taught a unit, or we had a unit on Chinese environmental history, in which we read the work of the late British historian of China, Mark Elvin. One of Elvin's articles, an overview of Chinese environmental and economic history, is ironically titled 3,000 Years of Unsustainable Growth. Now, this paradox of long-term intensive ecological exploitation while somehow avoiding collapse is not unique to China, but Elvin argued, and I would agree with him, that there's no better exemplar of it than China. The scholars presenting today are all, in a sense, engaged with Elvin's paradox about China's long-term environmental sustainability. Leading off today will be Yao Yuan, who's a postdoctoral associate at the program in agrarian studies at Yale and the incoming assistant professor of Chinese history at Case Western University. She's an environmental historian of northwestern China and of central Eurasia. She's currently working on a book manuscript tentatively titled Tigers and Locusts, State Governance and Environmental Changes in China's Arid Land, which studies the social and environmental history of rural societies in Xinjiang during the late Qing period.
Okay, thank you for your introduction. So I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So we were going to start our webinar from the core, but since I'm going first now, so we are going to start with the periphery from the part which is furthest from China's core. So thank you all for the invitation and thank you all for being here. So now I'm going to focus, first we are going to start with China's periphery, and I'm going to start with Xinjiang, which is a province that covers about 1/6 of China's territory, but only less than 2% of its population. So today I will be presenting one chapter from my book project, and this chapter focuses on the Kalis irrigation system in the Turbine Prefecture in Xinjiang. So before we start, I want us to first try picture. So when you picture irrigation system, what image comes to your mind? Is it lines or nets, or do you picture a network of canals or perhaps a series of pipelines? So what I'm going to show you is something that's in Xinjiang. So in the water planning sketches from Turban in Xinjiang in the late 19th century to early 20th centuries, the irrigation systems very, very often they appear like this. So something like the B strings. And each of these strings represents an underground irrigation facility known as the Kali system. So Kali system is also called Kanat in Iran, or you can also find it in Algeria called Fogara. So this is a very ancient method of groundwater supply used for centuries in arid and semi-arid regions across the Middle East, North Africa, and even parts of Latin America. So in China, this Kali system is concentrated primarily in Turban. And to understand why Kali is so significant in this region, so let's take a closer look at Turban's environment. Turban is located here, and you can also see where Xinjiang is in China and in the world map. So Turban is located in the eastern part of Xinjiang. And like most places in Xinjiang, this is a very extremely arid region, county. And the soil is very porous and unable to retain moisture most of the time, making it very, very highly susceptible to soil erosion and wind erosion as well. So it rarely rains in Turban, and also whatever water reaches the surface very quickly seeps underground. The primary source of water is these glaciers and snowmelt that come down from the nearby mountains. And in this map, it's mostly the mountains that in the northern, that's in the like northern top of Turban. So these are the primary source of water. At the same time, Turban is also one of the hottest places in China. It receives nearly 3,000 hours of sunshine annually, and the summer temperatures can soar to 50 degrees Celsius. That is 122 degrees Fahrenheit. This extreme heat is why the mountains near Turban are very often are called flaming mountains. But despite these very harsh conditions, this arid environment and these very, very hot temperatures and also very, very low precipitation, Turban has long been an agricultural hub. Has very, very warm climate, which allows for double cropping in the region. And it also has very, very abundant sunshine, which produces famously sweet fruit, especially the grapes. By the late 19th century, Turban became a key supplier of grapes and cotton to Russian market. None of this agricultural success would have been possible without the Kali's irrigation system. So how does Kali's work, and why was it so well suited for Turban's environment? Given Turban's high temperatures and minimal precipitation, irrigation had to focus on capturing and conserving water from underground sources. The Kali system was designed precisely for this purpose. It harnessed these glaciers and the snow melt from the mountains and directed underground to prevent evaporation. In the sketches that we just saw, they look like these B strings, but in reality, and from an aerial view, they mostly look like this. So you will see a series of kind of holes on the ground. The construction of a Kali system began with the excavation of a so-called mother well, as you can see on this diagram. So that is the source where the aquifers were located. And from there, usually the workers would dig a series of vertical shafts connecting them with the horizontal tunnels. And the beads and also the holes that we see on the pictures and on the frames, these are just these horizontal vertical shafts. So the underground tunnel would transport water to a reservoir in the basin below, where it was then redirected through canals for irrigation and domestic use. The existing studies on Cadiz really focus on its role as cultural heritage, such as its preservation in touristic attractions, like all the things that you can see in Turban nowadays, such as Cadiz Amusement Park or Cadiz Museum, or something called like a Cadiz Ethnic Cultural Park, like Kanjing and Kaerjing Mingsuyuan. So all of these things you can find in Turban nowadays. I believe that these perspectives tend to treat Cadiz as a relic of the past and something kind of frozen in history. So my research really takes a different approach. So rather than viewing Cadiz merely as a historical artifact, I really study its place in the lived experiences of the people who interacted with it. So I show that Cadiz systems were not just built, they had to be maintained, managed, and very often fought for by the people there. So by studying these everyday interactions, which included disputes over water rights, maintenance labor, and also state intervention, I try to show these very complex entanglements between water management, political control, and also property rights in these very arid landscapes. So all these things lead me to my central research questions in this chapter that I want to present. So these are the central research questions I want to ask, like for the people of Turban, what was it like to own and manage water underground? And second, what was it like to harness water in a very arid environment like Xinjiang? And finally, since water management is never just a technical issue, but it is always political. So what can the Kali system tell us about the Qing governance in Xinjiang? So the first thing we need to know about Cadiz is that they were very expensive and very labor intensive to construct and maintain. So we have these archives called the Turban Archives, and the archives have numerous contracts documenting the sale and lease of Cadiz infrastructure. So these contracts show that many transactions occurred because of the owners were either, there are three of the main reasons that I see very frequently in these contracts. They were either short of money, they would say 手中不便 pressured by debt, 外债逼迫, or they would say I was unable to dredge and maintain, like just 无力掏挖. So all these phrases appear everywhere in the archives. And these phrases really highlight the economic strain of maintaining the Cadiz infrastructure. Apart from that, the construction of a Cadiz also takes resources. So first, identifying an aquifer and also establishing a mother well could take months. And the entire system, which include these vertical shafts and these underground tunnels, needed an investment of several thousand silver taels. So after a Cadiz was built, it has to be constantly maintained. The shafts and tunnels had to be regularly dredged to prevent clogging from sand, silt, and debris. So given the complexity of this excavation and upkeep, this skilled labor was very important. And especially the local Uyghur Cadiz workers, which is called Cadiz Chi from Turban, they played a very crucial role because they are more familiar with the local topography and also the challenges of the underground digging. So they have this expertise in locating aquifers and navigating this very sandy soil, made them very essential to the expansion of irrigation networks across Xinjiang. So we can see this very demanding nature of Cadiz construction in one of the report about the Cadiz workers here. So this report is talking about the wages and also the difficulties that these Cadiz workers face. So it says the wages this time are higher than before because as the workers dug further, water started to come out from the bottom of the Cadiz. As they dug to the furthest extent, it started dripping from above, and Cadiz workers had to wear gourds over their heads, like hats, to hold water so that their sight would not be affected. And they were wet all over their bodies like fish. It was impossible to find workers without paying high wages. So this is a report that's written about just the nature of the work. So it really shows both the physical tool of the work and also the high cost and the specialized labor required to keep the Cadiz system functioning. Beyond the physical construction of Karis, there was also another critical dimension, that is the property rights. So who had access to the water, especially to the groundwater, and how was right to Karis and the water determined? So the high cost of building and maintaining Karis systems meant that access to water was deeply unequal. Usually you see these cases of wealthy merchants and landowners could afford to construct multiple Karis and expand both their land and water rights. Meanwhile, there are these poorer farmers often lacked the resources to build their own systems. Instead, they had to rent karis, share water with other households, or buy access within the existing water distribution rotations, or simply they would become tenant farmers or sharecroppers. So this created a highly complex and fluid bundle of rights surrounding the Kalia system. This ownership was divided into three interrelated components, as I show in this chart. So first, in the sources, you see karis, which is the physical and karis infrastructure, the kanjing. And second, you see in the source that you also see 坎水, which is the water supplied by the Cadiz system, which could also be allocated or sold separately. And the third component is the land irrigated by the water. And in the sources, it's called 坎地. So all three elements here, the 坎水, 坎地, and 坎井, they could be managed or owned separately, which led to the overlapping claims and very frequent disputes between different people. So these conflicts very often required intervention from local authorities, particularly as the Qing Chinese state expanded its administrative reach into Xinjiang. So Han Chinese officials were very often drawn into the negotiations and the mediations and also the legal rulings that kind of reshape the access to water and land in the region. To further illustrate these property disputes play out in practice, I will now turn to two specific cases from my research. So these two cases show the challenges of maintaining shared water infrastructure and also the water struggles over Karis ownership. So the first case is what I call a negligent maintenance case. So many cases of Kari's collapse and breakdown, system breakdown, they were not just due to environmental challenges, although it is a very, very important component of because of this very arid environment of Xinjiang. But many of the system breakdown and this irrigation breakdown, they were often resulted from these unresolved property disputes where fragmented and also contested ownership really discouraged the collective maintenance and also jeopardized the system's functionality. So here's the case. This case is from 1878. There's a Chinese farmer named Zhang Yichen who filed a complaint against a Uyghur farmer called Hashar. So Hashar was kind of occupying Zhang Yichen's karis and refused to turn the karis back to him and the irrigated land, also the irrigated land back to him. So Zhang Yichen went to the Turban Yamen and talked about this issue. So according to Zhang Yichen, the conflict escalated as Hashar and his brother, quote, secretly waited for my younger brother to leave the house. They drugged and pushed him by force and took him away. When he arrived at their home, they immediately made him change his Han Chinese clothing and shaved his head completely. I went to their home several times to demand his return, but they refused to give him back. Such lawlessness and disregard for order are intolerable. End of quote. So at first glance, the case appears to be about the kidnapping case, about the kidnapped relative. However, Zhang Yichen just kept talking about his primary concern, which is not his brother, but it was rather his Kadis system. So he accused Hashar of hoarding the Kadis while neglecting its upkeep. He kept saying, quote, Hashar, did not move a plow in the field, nor did he maintain a single shaft of the Kadis. If I do not take it back now and manage it myself, the Kadis will surely collapse and dry up by next spring, leaving the farmland without water. End of quote. So he really shows this kind of anxieties over this negligent maintenance. And his anxieties highlight a very common problem with cottage ownership, which is fragmented and contested claims, which discourage the collective maintenance. For Zhang Yichen, this maintenance threatened both the cottage survival and also his agricultural productivity. And these disputes over shared infrastructure could really escalate into broader social and economic grievances. So this case is a case of what I call negligent maintenance. And the next case really reveals another vulnerability of cottage irrigation, which is the financial burden on smallholders. So while some cottage owners will really struggle with contested ownership, others kind of faced a different problem, which is that they lack the resources to sustain their irrigation system. So this led to many impoverished peasants into what we may call a low-level equilibrium trap, which is a circle in which limited investment in small-scale caddies led to escalating maintenance costs, eventually making them unsustainable. So this is the example I took. It is a case from 1904. So in 1904, a group of smallholder farmers from the Tucson County in Turban, they petitioned to the Turban Yamen regarding a land and water dispute. Their complaints come from the actions taken by a local leader named Kader. And the smallholders had initially kind of collaborated with this Kader, with this local leader to develop a plot of land. But due to insufficient water access, they were forced to abandon the project. After that, Kader secretly sold the abandoned land to a wealthy landowner named Ma'i, who expanded his holdings and built a cottage exclusively for his own use. So the smallholders, the farmers who had relied on the shared water access, found themselves kind of shut out, and they sought intervention from local mediators, but their concerns were dismissed. So these disputes kind of escalated further when the farmers accused Ma'id and Kadir of using his wealth and influence to control politics and monopolize water resources. So in the report, the Yamen framed the conflict in these terms, quote, a wealthy household opening up new farmland and forcefully diverting irrigation water from smallholders' land, while small households are fearful and dare not speak up, end of quote. So this is a case which really shows how cottage construction not only enabled access to water but also reinforced these patterns of inequality. We have cases like this where wealthy landowners like Maid and Kader, they had the resources and connections to expand their agricultural production, while smallholders and small farmers faced growing barriers to securing water rights. So this really at a structural level, this very fluid nature of cottage property rights created opportunities for affluent landowners to consolidate control. Meanwhile, there are poor farmers were already struggling with financial strain, found it very difficult to maintain their cottage, leading to the abandonment and further marginalization of their position. So what can we learn from these cases and from studying water underground? I argue that unlike surface water systems, where the state authority was very visibly asserted through this canal construction and river regulation, this groundwater really, like water underground, really posed very distinct challenges to governance. They have this invisibility and diffuse nature of aquifers, which made this centralized control very difficult. And also accessing groundwater required localized expertise, labor, and also financial resources. This meant that cottage irrigation remained largely in the hands of those who could afford to maintain it. So the Qing state's approach to managing cottage systems reflects both these limitations of this rule and also its adaptability of its political reach in Xinjiang. So on the one hand, the state intervened in disputes like this, and sought to mediate conflicts over water rights. But on the other hand, its control over groundwater was inherently kind of constrained by the ecological and the local power structures. So in this way, the governance of underground water in Xinjiang through the study and through the Kali system really shows us this very uneven reach of imperial authority in a peripheral region where environmental and social conditions will really diverge sharply from the imperial core. So thank you for your attention, and I welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm having some trouble with my camera, but I guess it doesn't really matter at this point. Hopefully I'll fix it later. You can hear me though, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, that was a wonderful paper. It took me back to my own recent visit a few years ago to Turpan, and I can say that it was definitely the hottest and driest place I have ever been to. And I say that as someone who's from Australia. So, moving on. Second speaker today is Peng Yuyang, Assistant Professor of History and East Asian Studies at Oberlin College. She works on the history of science and technology, environmental history, and economic history in late imperial and modern China. And her current book project is titled A Herbaceous Revolution: How Crop-Based Handicraft Industries Transformed Upland Southeast China Between 1500 and 1970. It explores how the production of commodities such as Chinese indigo and the fiber plant rami in upland Southeast China sparked a prolonged transformation of the region's environment, economy, and society. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Professor Zelko, for the introduction. And I'd also like to thank Professor Jonathan Pettit for the invitation and the Center for Chinese Studies for the chance to talk about our research on this wonderful platform. So thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen? I hope so. Okay.
Yes.
Great. In my talk today titled RAMI, which is a fiber plant, Agriculture, Handicraft Industries, and Trade in Upland Southeast China from the 16th to the 20th centuries, I will focus on part of my first book project, which is developed from my dissertation, but I will briefly introduce the whole project before diving into the specific part. So this project tells the story of mountains in Southeast China, as you can see from the map. So I'm taking us from the northwest to the southeast. So upland Southeast China is an elevated region south of the Green Line, mostly below 1,500 meters or about 5,000 feet above sea level. So it's been fairly accessible from early on. It covers most of the 4 provinces of Zhejiang, Fujian, Jiangxi, and Guangdong, and parts of Anhui, Hubei, Hunan, and Guangxi provinces. It's a region roughly the size of 1/10 of the land area of China, and is surrounded by quite a few large plains and deltas where big markets are located, including the Yangtze River Delta and the Pearl River Delta, and also some coastal plains. And fairly dense water and road networks helped deliver goods outside of the region to both domestic and overseas markets, including Japan, Korea, and East Asia. Before the 16th century, people in this region made a living mainly from cultivating white rice, lumbering, tea farming, and mining. While these economies continued from the 16th century onward, as a result of rapid population growth, millions of people moved from one place to another within this region, much more widely cultivating the hills and mountainsides. And many migrants brought the seeds and skills of cultivating mostly herbaceous crops, including indigo, rami, tobacco, bamboo, and undertaking handicraft industries that process them into commodities. Indigo dye, rami cloth, tobacco, and bamboo paper. And even after many migrants settled down in their new homes later, the production continued and was often learned by the locals as well. So this new economy based on herbaceous crops, I argue, sparked a prolonged revolution in the Ming and Qing periods. I call it a revolution because the crops fundamentally reshaped the entire Afghan economy and environment. They cultivated many more hills and mountainsides. They utilized and transformed the environment in a new way, in addition to the economy of timber, tea, and mine ores. They further integrated the region with the lowlands and world economy. They enriched countless farmers, craftspeople, and merchants. They reshaped everyday life. So people had more clothes to put on, more colorful clothes, more paper for education, etc. And finally, they revolutionized agricultural policy, which turned from hostile to supportive of the cultivation of these crops. So one of the crops, Rami, and the whole industry are the focus of the rest of my talk. Although little known today, Rami as a fiber plant has been cultivated in China for thousands of years. The latest archaeological evidence even pushes back the early stage of using Rami to about 5,000 to 7,000 years ago in today's Zhejiang. And since then, people have grown Rami here and there in various regions, largely in the south. Nonetheless, it was not until the 16th century that we have records of people growing Rami all over upland Southeast China. So here's a map that I made for Rami cultivation in Fujian province using gazetteers. And you can see that every single one of the 44 inland and also mountainous county in Fujian grew Rami at some point from the late Ming to the early 20th century. It was a similar case in other parts of upland Southeast China, which makes the region one of the most important production centers of Rami. So what is the process from seed to fabric like? First of all, if starting from scratch, one needs to grow from seeds to seedlings before transplanting them. But after you have some mature Rami plants, most people would cultivate it through propagation from its big root system, or rootstock, as we call it, as you can see from the left one of the three photos. Propagation, which is planting by old roots or root cuttings, is not only faster, but also necessary, as the rootstock would grow too big and too old after some years. And every rootstock has quite a few stems, which could be split up and used to grow new plants. And by propagation, Rami grows fast and could mature next year. Moreover, it can be harvested 3 to 4 times a year without having to replant it, which makes it extremely productive. It is a great crop for the mountains as well, since it doesn't demand a lot of water or fertilizer. Although it grows well in flat and fertile land, it also grows well in hills and mountainsides. Besides, the elevated ground provides natural and good drainage conditions necessary for plants with a big rootstock like Rami. So a flood could easily destroy the root system. In addition, it's a very tall plant that could grow to as high as 2 to 3 meters, or about 7 to 10 feet, as you can see from the photo in the middle. That makes it vulnerable to winds, so the hill bodies could provide some protection. So this photo shows Rami growing in a hollow, a very small basin in a hilly area, and the hill bodies around protected from winds. Last but not least, Rami grows fast, which was an advantage for the migrant workers in the mountains who needed to make quick cash, at least at the beginning. And when the plant ripens, it's first harvested by stripping the cortex from the stalks. The cortex is the outer layer, including both the inner and outer barks. The photo on the right shows you the cortex, which is the fruit of my labor when I worked with people who harvested and processed Rami a few years ago. And the outer bark was then removed from the inner bark by scraping to obtain useful inner bark with fiber in it. The inner bark would then be retted or soaked in water to soften it and get degummed fiber. And fiber obtained so far is coarse and could be made into fishing nets, mosquito nets, ropes, shoes, etc. But to get fine fiber to make clothes, which is the most important part of the Remi industry, sometimes requires bleaching with quicklime or other materials. And then from there, people spin the fiber into yarns, apply rice paste to smoothen the threads, and eventually weave them into fabrics. And this fiber is extraordinarily strong, actually the strongest among all plant fibers. As you can see from the table from an experiment done in the early 20th century, Remi is stronger than any other plant fibers here, indicated by the property of tension. Its elasticity is also good, but it doesn't perform as well in torsion, meaning it's easy to leave wrinkles on fabrics. In addition, compared to other fibers, it's stiff and a bit scratchy, which makes it not super comfortable to wear. Nonetheless, exactly because of its stiffness, the fabric is breathable, making it perfect for summer clothing. Indeed, Remi fabrics have often been called 夏布 or summer clothes. And actually, we have records of people like Sun Yat-sen and Hu Shi wearing summer cloth garments. So back to the history of Remi in Southeast China. From the 16th to the 1800s, Remi cultivation was largely associated with the migrants working in the mountains, many of whom were called shack people by the Qing government, as they liked to build shacks to stay near the hills that they cultivated, both for the sake of convenience and because they couldn't really afford better housing. In addition, as they were engaged in robbery or uprising from time to time in the late Ming and early Qing, when their business went down, they were called Remi shack bandits. So both were derogatory terms, which render Remi a somewhat tabooed business. However, as the shack people problem was largely solved in many places in the mid-Qing period, and officials recognized the merit of growing Remi and other cash crops in the mountains, where it was hard to cultivate rice anyway, many officials were rather supportive of the cultivation of cash crops. Earning cash from these crops was better than nothing, the officials reasoned. They also figured, why not utilize the otherwise useless mountainsides? Indeed, many farmers grew Remi in the highly elevated ground where it was impossible to make paddies. As time went by, nonetheless, the officials began to worry about a new phenomenon, that Remi was competing with rice for paddies. In other words, many farmers grew Remi not only in the hills and the mountainsides, but also in the paddies, when the price of Remi was higher than the price of rice. In 1744, for example, the magistrate of Xingning County in Guangdong province put up a stele forbidding growing Remi in paddies. By that time, it was a popular practice for farmers to grow Remi in paddies. In fact, Remi growing paddy fields accounted for about 20 to 30% of all paddies in Xingning, a hilly county where paddy fields were somewhat scarce. And this concerned many local officials and gentry. The magistrate even ordered the destruction of Remi in paddy fields, yet things seemed not have changed. By 1875, local people were still planting Remi in paddies, and they were even willing to pay double the rent to rent paddy fields to grow Remi. On the other hand, we also see people designated certain fields to grow Remi specifically in Zhejiang province. Quite a few contracts and deeds from the first half of the 19th century there show us active transactions on Remi fields, either renting or buying them, often at a high price. For example, in 1831, a person named Chue Deqiong sold a Remi field to Chue Tiankai. The size of the field was only 1 fen or 1/10 of a mu, which is about like 61 square meters or 650 square feet. A pretty small field, I would say, yet it was sold at the price of 5,000 copper coins. This was a high price, as in a few years, a piece of paddy field was sold at about the same price and the same location. In other words, Remi fields were as roughly valuable as paddy fields, the best kind of land people could own. In addition, in the case where farmers rented Remy fields to grow Remy, they would pay Remy fiber as the rent. Not cash, not grain, but Remy, which tells us Remy fiber must have had a stable, if not increasing, market value. By the early 20th century, there developed a highly mature market in the southeast. In early 20th century, Wanzai, Jiangxi province, for instance, one of the best-known places for producing summer clothes, people traded three things relevant to Remy: raw Remy, Remy yarn, and summer clothes. And people who made Remy into threads would purchase raw Remy mostly from Remy growers directly, who might wander on the street and peddle. And the purchasers would bleach the raw Remy and process them into yarns. They would then sell the yarns either directly or through brokers to people who would use them to weave clothes. The final product, summer clothes, would be transported by local or outside merchants to markets in Nanchang, the capital city of Jiangxi, as well as Hunan, Hubei, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Anhui provinces, other places along the Yangtze River, and overseas markets in Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia. We don't have data before the mid-19th century regarding the total output of Remy clothes or other Remy products in China, except that it was widespread in the South. But the mid-19th century seemed to be an important turning point for the industry, including the opening of treaty ports, etc. On one hand, the imports of cotton and later rayon or artificial silk, and the rapid development of the cotton and silk industries made the three textiles much more available to people across the country, threatening the production of Remy. On the other hand, export opportunities boosted the industry. In particular, Japan imported most Remy fiber, whereas Korea was the largest market craving Remy clothes. All classes, from farmers to yangban in Korea, liked to wear Remy clothes. We have some numbers. In the 1930s, the consumption of Remy clothes in Korea accounted for half of the entire textile consumption. From 1919 to 1929, more than 30% of Remy clothes produced in China was exported to Korea, which accounted for more than 80% of Remy clothes exports. On the other hand, Korea imported from China 41% of the country's total consumption of summer clothes on average from 1927 to 1931. So the trade relationship is important for both sides. However, the Great Depression and the later Sino-Japanese War proved devastating to the industry, along with the impact by other textiles. In addition, in the 1920s, Japan began to grow Remy in Korea and raised the tariff for Remy clothes imported from China, which struck another blow to Remy production in China. So to conclude, while most research on the mountain economy in China has focused on timber, tea, and mines, my project shows another significant aspect, agriculture based on cash crops or herbaceous crops in the mountain economy from the 16th century onward. This chapter specifically demonstrates how Remy, as one of the most important cash crops grown in upland Southeast China, constituted part of that economy and reshaped the ways in which uplands were utilized and incorporated into international economy. So that is my talk today. Thank you very much for listening. And I very much look forward to the questions and discussion later.
Great. Thank you very much, Peng Yiyun. Moving on to our final talk today, we have Wang Yo, who is the Harper Schmidt Fellow and a collegiate assistant professor in social sciences at the University of Chicago. Her current book project is titled Collaboration Amidst Conflict, Rural Communities and the Making of a Sustainable Waterscape in the Lower Yangtze Delta from 1500 to 1850. It examines everyday human environmental interaction in China's economic and cultural center through hydraulic institutions, agricultural knowledge production, and gendered labor regimes. In August, she will begin her new role as assistant professor in Chinese history at Georgetown University. Take it away, Wang Yo.
Thank you for, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. So thanks for the introduction, Frank. And so I'm figuring out. Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, so water as a both disruptive and connective ecological force generates all sorts of interesting questions on environmental interactions, hydronic science and technology, gender, and other power relations. So today I will focus on a basic dimension, which is how things got done and how the vast water got managed. And I will focus on one river and its community-based repairs. So officially, this river is known as Jiandu. It's a major river in the Danyang County of Jiangsu Province. So locally, it's named Grand Peace or Taiping. In Qing China, it was collectively maintained by about 80 riparian villages, not once or twice, but at least 12 times during 1.5 centuries. The general pattern of collaboration it represents is rather common, at least in Jiangnan, but its scale is outstanding and relatively unusual. It also challenges two major assumptions in Chinese historiography and provides us with a community-based alternative in environmental management. So in Chinese history, there is lots of backs and forths about the state capacity. Water governance is often the reference point. So you may be reminded of the Wittfogel's Oriental despotism, which argues Oriental societies, like and especially China, developed despotism through the exercise to draft and monitor hydronic labors. So while we've long rejected this thesis, its spirit, the mutual dependence between the hydronic management and state power still hangs here. So in this way that I think Yuan and I are both trying to challenge it. And also in the environmental history and the larger discussion on environmental management, there is a similar emphasis on the role of the state or external authorities. So water can be categorized as common pool resources. Because of difficulty to exclude free riders, common pool resources discourage cooperation, give rise to what economists call collective action problems, and popularly known as the tragedy of the commons. So to deal with it, the intervention of external authorities like the state is often required. And in the meanwhile, there is a hydronic community or hydronic society, mostly in Chinese and Japanese language literature. Water management became the site, not for the state, but for rural communities to consolidate power against the state. These communities came together naturally, and there was no need of community making. Yet, given the same collective action problem, the thesis also highlights the internal conflicts and argued that by the 17th century, all the collaboration collapsed. Notably, the two apparently opposite assumptions share one logic. So there is a logic of the hydronic mode of production, that the hydronic management could lead to wider power consolidation at either the state or community level. Our river of Grand Peace or Taiping, however, rejects this logic. It also overturns both the state-centered framework of environmental governance and the presumed hydronic community or society. On my way to getting this episode, I will briefly explain the region I study, Jiangnan. So welcome to the core. And for me, an obvious reality of this China's economic and cultural center that is rarely seen. And here is, here is the Danyang, where the Taiping River is located. So known as the world of water, Jiangnan has all these waterways and carefully engineered for irrigation, navigation, and flood control, and needed to be maintained. And furthermore, environmental historians have shown that late imperial China, especially the Qing, was a time of environmental crisis caused by excessive population growth, deforestation, and exploitation of frontiers and in the peripheries. all pose unprecedented challenges to Jiangnan's waterscape and had to be managed. However, it's not the state who maintain it. Instead, since the 15th century, the state gradually withdrew from the water management of Jiangnan. Yet, according to the thesis of hydronic community or society, all collaboration collapsed by the end of the Ming. Given the nature of water as common poor resources, and self-organizing hydronic maintenance was indeed very difficult and always ready to fail. Now, I hope you see this obvious reality. Despite the overall environmental degradation of late imperial China, and despite the familiar narrative of China's hydronic reliance on the state and the collapsed community collaboration, Jiangnan remained prosperous, and this prosperity wasn't possible without proper water governance. So how could we interpret the contradictory? And here comes the Taiping River and its community-based river work. So the river started from the south gate of the Danyang County and ran about over 10 miles and ended here. Drawing water from the Yangtze, the Taiping Basin doesn't lack water. If properly managed, the river could irrigate about 30,000 mu of land and benefit over 20,000 rural residents. And since around the 15th century, the basin started to experience increasing sentiments from the Yangtze River due to the deforestation in the middle and upper stream. So the state led a few initiatives to remove the silt in the Taiping River, but gradually retreated. Since the mid-17th century, most river repairs were self-organized. So such achievement may create the illusion of powerful hydronic institutions or power consolidation, Yet, I actually don't find any evidence that the non-state community-based riverwork institution wield its power elsewhere. By contrast, they appear to be unimportant even for its managers. So among the nearly 16 biographies of managers I located, only 12 even mention supervising river works as one of the achievements. While other public affairs such as bridge building and non-official family relief, debt forgiveness are often praised. And among the 12, only 3 located more than 7 Chinese characters on river management, which means that extremely vague and superficial. It's unclear why. Probably these river works were so intertwined with everyday life that the biographers found it unexciting. But clearly, the hydronic management here didn't really need to power consolidation. And the first attempt of this community-based river work was in 1653. 47 villages came together and proposed a river works without a state sponsorship. But it seems as no actual repair happened. Here, each blue mark represents a self-organized repair, or in this specific case, its proposal. The first community repair was in 1675, and it was timely. Just in 3 years, droughts plagued 2 years in a row, and many alongside the 2 riverbanks relied on the newly accessible Yangtze tides to irrigate. Yet, there is a minor issue. Alas, dredging was incomplete. Although those in the unrepaired downstream also benefited slightly, the benefits of river works were not fully spread. Well, you can imagine how mad the people living in the downstream might feel. Therefore, for years, people negotiated. Unfortunately, this is not the carve imposed by the state and is not ready to succeed. Repair was proposed several times, but was never implemented. Here, the villages were well aware of the collective action problem. The self-organized river works had no coercive power like the state, Even if a village doesn't participate in the work, as its canal are already connected to the river, it could easily free ride. So why should they? To overcome the institutional challenge requires institutional solutions. Through these years of negotiations, for years, by 1684, riparian communities crafted a set of arrangements to mobilize the labor in a powerful and sustainable manner. And at the center is to exclude free riders, or in their own words, to control the benefits, need of the riverworks. Villagers who did not contribute labor would be rejected water access during droughts, and the benefits received should be consistent with its labor contribution. To achieve that, the villages need to materialize the vague riverworks benefits and turn it into something tangible and calculable. And they created a wonderful water well quota system. First, every 20 mu of benefit land should contribute 1 labor. Then, for every 2 labors contributed, a village was permitted to use 1 7-person water well during droughts. While it is pretty hard to trace how much water a person could pump up, it is probably easy to count how many water wells are installed alongside the riverbanks. I haven't found any illustration of this 7-person water well, but this 5-person one might be close. So please be aware of the sex ratio here. This is a modern picture of the 5 persons, 2 are women. So hydronic sites are often imagined as a male domain. And in fact, all the hydronic labors in the Taiping Basin and elsewhere are often called fu, meaning adult men. However, based on my own reconstruction of the gender division of labor in Jiangnan, which is with an article recently published in late Imperial China, this photo actually represents the female labor in water governance quite accurately. And if it's a more strenuous work, we might have even more women. So I'm happy to elaborate it later if there is interest. And the outcome of this and other institutional renovation was applaudable. So immediately after these communal rules were established, 73 riparian villages joined the riverworks, a 55% increase from the earlier years. They in total claimed nearly 1,400 labor counts. So if we do the math, it represents about 28,000 more of arable land. It reaches about 75 of the river's irrigation capacities in the 1950s. But the later was achieved only after the electronic pumps and mechanic engineering expanded the irrigation scope. So in other words, by this time, all the villages that could benefit from the riverworks were mobilized. So further, the changes in the riverwork benefits were actively traced. So as most of the villages still exist today, so I use the GIS to geocode them on this georeference map, or in this 19th century map added on the top of a contemporary Google map. The bigger the dot is, the more land or labor the villages claimed. So among the 3 years for which I have labor records, the riparian communities as a whole contributed a similar amount of labors. But 2/3 of the villages changed their claims labor counts. So as you can see in the blue, with those who changed once, and the yellow that fluctuated all the 3 records. So while the labor counts of the brown villages wasn't updated, it was not because any error in the rule enforcement, but about some unnuanced institutional designs I cannot cover today. So thus, by controlling the benefits of the riverworks, the Taiping communities minimize the risk of the free riding and mobilize enough labor for its riverworks, despite it's not the corvée imposed by the state. So everything sounds neat and tidy. So the Taiping communities So in fact, in the local records I relied on, there is a strong desire to portray a harmonious cooperation. However, if you read them against the grain, a different world opens up. So villages did try to hide the land ownership. Laborers might refuse to come or arrive late. Supervisors might be lazy supervising on site, and the dredging quality might be bad. And if some underground water popped up, instead of draining it, people tended to dump it to a neighboring section charged by a different village. So everything that you imagine could go wrong, might go wrong, and probably indeed went wrong. And it caused blood, deaths, and legal cases. So dive into these conflicts and other records. I also discovered a major institutional change in the mid-18th century on leadership structure to strengthen managerial forces and address the frequent conflicts. But still, during the 1.5 century, villages were constantly dancing on the edge of failure, and the collaboration was often so close to collapse, but managed to sustain. So there was, in this way, that there was probably no secret of collaboration, but the continuous institutional innovations and the efforts to be together for some shared benefits. So to conclude, there are two major assumptions in Chinese historiography on the water management. So one on the mutual dependence between the hydraulic management and the state power, and another on a natural community collaboration against the state that collapsed by the 17th century. So both share that underlying logic of power consolidation. So, however, all of these are overturned by the community-based Taiping River works, which draws our attention to the arduous efforts to sustain Jiangnan's water landscape. When the state retreated from hydraulic management, rural residents served not only as physical laborers, but also as architects of long-lasting hydraulic institutions and the linchpins of the prosperity of China's economic center. Meanwhile, one state from the hydraulic management, as I think both I and Yuan are trying to do, we're actually at a better position to evaluate the statecraft itself. So instead of providing hydraulic infrastructure for all, the state made deliberate choice to maximize its resources and allocate tremendous investment in projects where the state sponsorship was most needed, such as the Yellow River, and also to some like internal peripheries and frontiers. So in the more resourceful regions like Jiangnan, the state turned to nurture and support community efforts and was present in a less direct but equally indispensable way. And last but not least, the success of our Taiping River, or Jiangnan in general, became the silver lining for the overwhelming environmental decline in late imperial China. So to what extent was it an exception? Or it represents some missed opportunity due to the country's turmoil since the mid-19th century. Okay, so this is how things got done and how water got managed. So thank you so much, and I look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Wang Yo. Okay, I believe anyone who has in the audience who has questions, we'll be taking them through the chat section of Zoom today. And Jonathan, you'll be managing those, is that
That's
correct?
right. So there's a Q&A button at the very bottom. You can submit your questions through the Q&A.
Okay, good. I guess I will just ask a couple of questions while we're gathering those from the audience. I'll start with the final paper. Wang Yo, your work there was quite fascinating to me as someone who's looked at the Wittfogel thesis as it's been applied, for example, by Donald Worster to the United States and other regions of the world. And I know that it is seen as a kind of too broad a form of environmental determinism, but nonetheless, it's hard to get away from the sort of broader thesis of it when you look at the societies in general that emerged from a sort of dependency on large-scale hydraulic engineering projects over time, that there isn't a kind of socio-political corollary to them that emerges from the needs of, as you say, corvée labor, centralization, etc. So your case study here sort of complicates that, indeed, in some ways, even repudiates that thesis. Is this something you would say, if you are looking back at the sort of longue durée of the history of water in China, that it more likely unfolded in this kind of fashion, sort of localized, with the state kind of there, but not really exerting a heavy hand and not really kind of forcing local people to control their water in a certain way, and that it was just really sort of almost a bottom-up process more than a top-down process?
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Do you want me to answer it, or you have some other questions?
No, go ahead. Please answer.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I would say that one thing I can definitely see that why Wittfogo like draw the popularity in many ways, especially I think for all of us who are familiar with the Chinese historiography, there are Chinese sources like the state talk a lot on the water management. But on the other hand, I think it is, and also like this, to my surprise, I was in large part of my research, I was trying to figure out where are the sources of this potentially that existing the community management. And I realized it seems not really important for the people because it seems that they consider it as an everyday part of everyday life, so that we only see it like when things went wrong. So, for example, we can see that in Yuan's case, there were like legal cases going on, and then like when it collapsed, and so people start to say that how our environment becomes so miserable. And so in this way that I would say it seems for me there is actually given the fact that in the Lower Yangtze Delta we don't really have the states kind of withdraw gradually in the region, but also its landscape or it's the entire function of this region requires sophisticated water management, like make it possible to think like it has to be something going on there. It's either the state was doing like a smaller investment that is not recorded, which is unlikely, but or there is like some strong like local communities going on, and this is what is happening there. And so I would say, and also like in the long durée of the Chinese history of water management, even in the Jiangnan region, we actually see that sometimes there is a state stepping up, and sometimes it's the like large landlords, or like the sometimes it's like more like local communities, like more like villages in a relatively less hierarchical ways. And also we have to remember that while we as Chinese scholars probably emphasize that there is a long tradition of Chinese civilization, about I need to do the calculation more, but a significant time of China was actually scattered. There was not a really strong centralized government to do the work. And also that we can even argue that the government was not really so strong until probably 11th or 12th century, until the Song Dynasty. So in this way, I think the Wittfogo model has been, and also like in Chinese history in general, has long really rejected this Wittfogo model. What is there is like to what extent, what's the role of the state? So like how do we evaluate the role of the state in this community, and also where is the role of the communities? It seems I lost my string of thoughts occasionally, but I hope this partly answers the questions.
No, it's very good, and it does complicate my understanding of that model in a good way, and suggests that the picture overall is more complex, and that there's a sort of more fractured pattern of kind of hydraulic development at various times and places that don't conform to a kind of broad Wittfogel sort of style of state top-down management all the time, although that clearly is there some of the time in some of the places, I suspect. Are there any questions in the chat yet?
We know.
Okay, then
people should definitely.
I'll continue then for a bit longer. And by all means, the three of you can ask questions of each other as well, so don't be shy. So water, turning to the other two papers, where I guess I would ask more a sort of broader question there about soil. What is the kind of history of the soil management in both those two very different areas there in Xinjiang and also in more in southern well-watered parts of China that the two of you discussed? Has there been a kind of constant and fairly uniform way of maintaining soil fertility in both those regions? What has it generally been, or has it changed over time? And do they both rely extensively just on the kind of bounty of loess soil in China and have gotten by with that? I know that in large parts of China, it's this almost sort of endless bounty of wealthy of rich loess soil. Is that the case here? So that it's not something that needs to be considered all that much, or is it a constant consideration of how to maintain soil fertility in these two different kinds of areas?
So let me take it first. I'm sure I think Xinjiang will be very, very different from Yiyun's region. So in my reading of the sources, I think the major concern of the state and also the people there is about water, because most of the land and agriculture plots in Xinjiang are the oases. So it really depended on where they could find water for irrigation. So most of the Qing's plan and also their aspirations are really about developing irrigation system, and it's like written down in the sources and in the maybe the words of the emperors. They think that as long as they have the irrigation built, then they can open up more land in Xinjiang. So that's general perception of Xinjiang as this vast, fertile, and kind of an empty, unoccupied land, and with lots of things to be opened up. And then we go further, we can see that there is some senses about the soil fertility. So there is very regular practices of fallow land done by the Uyghurs and Uyghur farmers, and also by the Chinese merchants and farmers coming in. So there are regularly fallow, which takes usually about a circle of 3 terms. So they will kind of cultivate 1/3 of the land. If it's empty enough, they'll occupy 1/3 of the land and then shift it to the next 1/3 of the land. So there's the circle of fallow going on. But one thing I wanted to say in my time period, which is the late 19th or the Qing period, or Qing to early Republican in general, is that I think Wang Yu and Yiyun can also see that the Qing population really had almost tripled during the Qing dynasty from the 17th to the maybe early 20th centuries. So there is this huge coming in of maybe Han Chinese settlers, or also Hui Muslims as well. And also population just in general just had this very huge growth in all over China, which kind of led to the maybe the big framework of environmental degradation that we are talking about. So this situation led to in Xinjiang, it kind of manifested in the way that many of the fallow land cannot be fallowed anymore. And then there are Chinese kind of farmers coming in. They will do some of the kind of fertility management, including the dumping of agricultural residuals, which is common in Xinjiang. They believe that as I say, dump some of the residuals, it's called kind of 稻渣耕种. Once they kind of dump the residuals in some land, they can kind of manage the fertility, and the uncultivated land can be arable land. And there's also manure management too, which in most of the cases I see Chinese farmers do it. So they will use manure management as well in terms of the soil fertility, like a kind of experiments. But in general, I would say that Xinjiang has very arid land in which most of the Chinese maybe soil fertility or like a soil science didn't really work in Xinjiang's situation. And then the late 19th to early 20th century is really the time that they are kind of exploring the limits and trying to figure out what can be done, and which led to more and more things that we can tell in the 20th centuries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, which is definitely very important for my region as well. So I would say a couple of aspects of that question or in history. So I will talk about Rami as well as other crops that I study. I would say Rami, indigo, and bamboo, they do require some fertilizer, but not very much. Although tobacco is the most demanding of all of them. And but the fertilizers they use constantly were like pretty regular ones, like manure, like Gaoyan just mentioned, and bones or feathers, everything that I could find. And they also practice like crop rotation, which is extremely important, especially for tobacco, which is again more demanding than other cash crops. And so the farmers, they were aware, and they would practice rotation. Like I think I don't remember all the details, but they would grow trees first. And then after a few years, they would grow tobacco and maybe other things. So it will be a cycle of different crops or plants. But in general, I think the soil erosion was a big concern in late Imperial China. Although it's not just about cash crops, but also like New World crops like maize. I think maize took the most blame from the government, although like Rami and tobacco were also like blamed for causing soil erosion. Although the degree to which they did cause the damage is questionable because, the officials often exaggerated. But yes, there is constant soil management and there are problems.
Thank you. We have a question for Wang Yu. This is from Xinwang. So thank you for sharing. May I ask whether there's any role in religious factors on the communities to manage the water, and is there any relation between the retreat of state and the topic of Huangquan 不下县, so the kind of imperial rule not going down to the county level?
Yep. So thanks for the wonderful questions. I was actually the first of the role of religious, or at least popular religion was something always in my mind. But to be honest, I don't really find much. We know that we know from other literature that religion or religious network was indeed some very important part of the communal life in the Lower Yangtze Delta or the Jiangnan region. But it seems that not much in this particular water governance. I don't really see any worship of like, river gods or anything like that. But instead, I would say that the temple in general plays a probably important space for the discussion. So that it seems that people tend to gather in the temples to discuss all these events. And also, it's like the temple is also the place that, you are required to host all the plays and related to. And so one thing is I didn't really mention is one penalty. Actually, one penalty of if you like if a single village like violated the rule is that they need to sponsor one or two plays. Which is probably located in front of the temple. So, but in general, I don't really think the religious factor plays a more important role here. On the other hand, so the traitor of state, I would say, is probably not related to the idea that the state will not penetrate in the local communities. And actually the idea that the 皇权不下线 or that the government and the imperial authority will not go beyond the county level is actually, I would say, has already long been proved problematic at least. And so for me, according to my research, it seems that the retreat is related to a transformation of hydrology of the region after a major project in the 1400s, which make it possible that for local communities to collaborate on a smaller scale and also of course the population growth make there is enough labor in a sort of relatively small piece of land so that people can they don't need to mobilize laborers across counties, for example. So which is also provides certain possibilities in this later large scale collaboration. And actually, since I'm already talking, may I ask a quick question to Yuan? And so on the labors, so you mentioned that so the carriers required the very specialized labor, and it seems very expensive. So would you mind just slightly elaborate like who are these laborers? And also, I'm not sure if you will have the records that how they are paid, and also they are like more like specialized region. So where are they from? They're from local region, or they are probably like like how to say that seasonal laborers that probably like migrating to regions which need carriers and maintain. And also who maintain them. So it seems that it requires this specialized skills to maintain them, or they were just like you hire someone to construct it and it can be maintained locally. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the question on labor, Wang. So there are really labor is a huge component of the carries, and it is the part that takes most of the money. So there are several cases. If it is a private carries, which is opened by the farmer or like a wealthy owner, like a merchant themselves, they will hire local carries master mostly to open this first. So Kyrie's master can be either Uyghur or Han Chinese. I found both cases, although there are more Uyghur Kyrie's masters in Turban. So they can open this, which takes some of the expertise. And once it's constructed, then the maintenance is not that specialized. So you can do the dredging and the cleaning yourselves. So the Turban Archives has lots of requests to borrow cereals and the money from the government just to maintain, because the farmers would go to the government and say that my car is collapsed, so I cannot pay the grain tax this year. You need to lend me money so I can just maintain the functionality of the carries. So we see like millions is an exaggeration, thousands of records just every year, especially before the spring sowing. They will come to the government and ask to borrow grain and cereals, which is to pay the laborer these cereals, or money just to pay the laborers. So they could just complete the maintenance or just a cleaning of the carries. So there are also state-sponsored carries, which is like a rare cases because most of the cases is private. So in these state-sponsored carries, we can see actual number of the wage of the carries workers, which we can tell is paid by money. And there are both Uyghurs and the Han Chinese kind of workers. And the Uyghur farmers were paid lower than Han Chinese farmers. So which led to the officials written, they would be writing the report saying that actually the Uyghur farmer workers are better because they are cheaper, and the Han Chinese workers, they are actually more expensive. So let's just hire Uyghur farmers to do that. And then which means there are laborers and then kind of masters doing both kinds of the work, the construction and then the maintenance, and they are paid either by cereals most of the time and sometimes by money.
We're down to the last couple minutes here. We have a question for you. It says, thank you for the great talk. What relation, if any, between the upland crops like Rami that you study and tea or timber? And was there any competing demand on labor or land between these upland industries? It's from Cai Xuexin.
Thank you so much for the question, which is important. Though, as far as I have read, I don't think there's much competence of labor between tea or timber and these upland crops. But I think there's competence for labor between these crops and wet rice. Actually, that's the most important kind of conflict I've seen so far. Because although it's a mountainous region, there are wet rice like paddy fields in the basins or valleys or in the kind of small slopes that are not too steep. And also specifically the season when they are supposed to grow wet rice and the season when they're supposed to cut bamboo to make paper are the same. So I think that raises some conflicts, at least in the mid 20th century that I've seen from the archives. And but I haven't really seen other conflicts between tea and these crops and timber. But maybe I should look further. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our three speakers and our moderator. I've been looking forward to this webinar for a long time, and you didn't disappoint. It was very engaging and really it was great. So for those in the audience, feel free to contact the Center for Chinese Studies to get on our mailing list for upcoming webinars. Our next one will be on March 5th. That is Chinese Capital Markets and Corporate Finance. So with that, I bid you all farewell, and yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you for having
you very
us.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Aloha.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You too.